The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/getadvice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Hello and welcome to this experiment at the Escape Festival. This is the first time we've done a live podcast. I was going to say it's the first time we've ever had two guests, but we've quite often had Mihi Forbes and one of Annabelle's animals or children.
Yeah.
Which is the only other.
Yeah.
So it's a new territory for us.
I usually bring Mihi when I'm hungover and I need extra backup. So that's if you hear her, you know why.
Quickly, housekeeping, phones on silent if you like. You're welcome to wear a mask if you wish. We're recording this and this goes for the people listening at home as well. Welcome to wear a mask. Please turn your phones off. If there's an emergency, the exits are all here the way you came in and it's gather in the courtyard. My name is Toby Manhire. I'm the editor-at-large of The Spin-off, and I will introduce this gathering of fine people. Annabelle Lee Mather, that one there, is the executive producer of The Hui, the creator of The Casketeers. She has politics in her DNA. She is an enemy of injustice and an enemy of pigeons. Ben Thomas beside her is a former press secretary to Chris Finlayson. He loves Zorbs, craft beer, and having a nice time online. He's director at the PR and lobbying firm Capital, and he recently completed a contract as comms guy for the newly elected Auckland Mayor, Toolsdown Wayne Brown. Ben was one of Mr. Brown's boys. He was a true Wayniac.
You'd be amazed how hard it was to get that to catch on during the campaign.
Waynia. Yeah. Well, it happened. Tēnā koe to Jan Tinetti, who joins us as a guest. Tauranga-based MP, who at one point recently looked like she was going to have to be defeated in 2 by-elections in 1 year. The only member of the Labour caucus who was secretly happy when he was in some form of...
This is true.
Jan Tinetti is a rising star of the Ardern Cabinet. She's better placed than many as a former teacher and principal, as an Associate Minister for Education. She's also the Minister for Women and the Minister for Internal Affairs. And that presents a slight difficulty for her, which I'm sure you'll appreciate, because you'll have heard people talking about whether or not they're speaking with their ministerial hat on or their MP hat. And in that light, I thought I'd help the situation by actually creating some hats. So there you go, Jan. That's your MP hat.
My MP, thank you.
And there's your minister hat. I even made a little crown at the top of it there. So you can keep those. I've got no hats for you. I'm sorry, Tania Tapsell. Very good. I love it. You're welcome to keep swapping them through the course of this event.
Okay.
We thought about who we would get for some mayor power, and we thought about Wayne Brown, but then we realised that he doesn't work on weekends, and he doesn't make any appearances in the media. So we've also got his large adult son Ben Thomas here. So
I almost didn't make it today. I was like late because I've been very busy, right? I've been winning the mayoral election for one round, and I took off late, and like it was almost like sort of like the Zorb misadventure. I got off on the wrong like off ramp on my way here. Like I was almost at Hamilton, and there's like a service centre thing, and I hadn't had a coffee, so I was like, I'll get like a caffeinated drink, right? So I like pulled onto it. I went inside, got a refreshing V, quaffed it, retrieved my car from the shop front, which had been used in a ram raid while I was inside. But then when I went back on the motorway, I found myself like heading to Auckland, and I was like, I realised, I've had some caffeine by now. Like it can't be that I just like went the wrong way. And then I remembered like the One News Kantar poll, and I realised that the whole country's headed in the wrong direction. And one more podcast in the can. Cut it, it's done. But anyway, then I was on my way straight to Tauranga, stopping only every 5 to 6 kilometres so that Simeon Brown could get out and take a photo of pothole.
Did you for the pothole of the week competition?
No, it's a running series.
Yeah,
it's like a photo essay that never ends.
Yeah.
We're going to get some chiaroscuro lighting on the way back tonight.
So we couldn't get the Auckland mayor, as I was saying. We thought perhaps we should instead get the Tauranga mayor. So I googled that. No luck. But we've done much better than that. We've got just from down the road the mayor of Rotorua Lakes, winner by a landslide. Tania Tapsell.
Thank you.
Also a former parliamentary candidate for the National Party. Can I ask you, Tania? You had this fantastic victory. Congratulations again. What do you think people were voting for in you, and how much of that, if insofar as you can discern, was a vote that was a nationwide theme, and how much of it was about Rotorua?
I think only a small part of it was the desire for change, and you've seen that across all councils in New Zealand, is everyone just wanted something completely different. They were fed up with the direction. But I think a big part of it for Rotorua supporting me as the first female Māori mayor, who's 30 years old as well, to top it off. But I think what people really love to see in politicians is that they do work hard and they are present in the community. So fortunately for me, I've also served Rotorua as a Rotorua Lakes councillor for the previous 9 years. So that was 9 years of working hard, having Rotorua see not only what my values are, what you stand for, but actually watching you get things done. And I think that's the most important thing that people looked for in this election, and they will look for in the next election, is they're over politicians making promises, they're well over politicians making excuses, and they just want to see politicians who are going to get out there, put some skin in the game, and deliver for their community. And I hope that that's why they voted for me. I look forward to achieving that.
And one of the tasks that a mayor has is to communicate that message from the community to Wellington, to central government. Have you had any conversations with central government yet, with anyone from the cabinet?
Well, I've got my first meeting with Minister Woods, because emergency housing has been quite a big issue for Rotorua, coming up this Thursday, which I'm really looking forward to. But already, like Minister Sepuloni was having to respond in answer to some of my statements, which was on the Sunday. So I wasn't officially a mayor then, but just about needing to seek an exit strategy for that. So certainly as a mayor, you do need to have these conversations with government. But I do want to say, never in living memory do I believe that central government policies have influenced local government and local councils and local communities as much as they have before. In the past, we've been quite independent. We operate and we look after our infrastructure and our water, and then government looks after all the national policies and strategies. But now those are really affecting local communities. So we will have conversations. Sometimes they'll be tough, but hopefully they will be productive.
So hypothetically speaking, if you were to be sitting on a stage directly beside a cabinet minister,
what would be my wish list?
What would you say to her?
Just the reminder that as we do go through what is sometimes very necessary change to achieve better outcomes for the community, we're doing that in a way that maintains that local voice, because our local communities are freaking out a little bit. We've seen the changes with tertiaries being amalgamated. the changes with district health boards now being amalgamated, and now, of course, the big question about what will happen to the three waters. And so in all of those discussions, whether there's cost savings or better benefits to the community, the main thing that is consistent is people's desire to have their say in policies and in decisions that will affect them. So as long as we can keep doing that, I think we'll be better off.
Do you want to respond to that, Jen? I don't want to maybe choose which on there.
Absolutely, and that's what we're very, very cognizant of, is making certain that the local voice is important and really kept to the fore, and all the changes that have been necessary and that we must go through to make for a better country. But I really take that point, Tania, and that's exactly what I want to see, is to make certain that the local voice is right there in everything that we're doing. And yeah, we had a conversation out the back, and it's really good to get to know you, and I have to say big congratulations to you for what you have done and what you have managed to achieve in the last wee while, and what a wonderful campaign that you ran.
Thank you.
So
very
congratulations.
Much. Thank you. Now that she's been so graceful to me on stage, I'll admit that I also was backstage saying that she did incredibly well in the debate for the by-election. Although the result obviously was different, I think that she represented Tauranga's interests very well. So, yeah. Look at that. Wouldn't it be nice if all politicians were so nice to each other?
If only Ben and Annabelle could get on so well. One more question for you, Jan, just on this. As an MP based in Tauranga, watching the commission operate here, I don't live here, but talking to people seem pretty happy with the way things are going here. Is that fair enough, roughly? And Tolly is running this commission of 4, I think. Seriously, maybe that is a template for the whole... with the exception of Tania Tapsell, should we just do that around the country?
No, I don't believe that at all, but I believe that when something becomes completely dysfunctional, that you've got a city that is as important to the structure of the whole of the country as what Tauranga is to New Zealand, and nothing is getting done, and decisions get made and then they get rescinded and then they come back on the table again. And over the time that I've lived here since 2006, very, very little has been progressed. Then we had to do something about that. And when you had the infighting that was getting in the way of progress, and the whole of the Bay of Plenty was being impacted by that, then something had to be done. But what the Minister has said is that we will be going back to full democracy in 2024, and that's a hard and fast date. She does not want to see what happened in ECAN as an example. She wants to make sure that we do get back to a full democracy. But Anne Tolley and the fellow commissioners were given a mandate of what they had to achieve in that time, and gee, they're doing a good job.
Ben Thomas, you're on the record as saying that all local government in the country should be abolished.
Yes.
And replaced with, I don't know if it's the Department of Works or something like that. Yeah. Was your participation in the Wayne Brown campaign part of a Trojan horse strategy to destroy it from within?
No, the thing is, these are structural questions, right? It could be that, for 1 3-year term, you do get, the best possible candidate, Wayne Brown, elected to the Auckland mayoralty. He's an engineer, he knows how, sewage works, right? At the same time, when you look across local government as a sector, right, across the whole country, 600 elected positions or something, and water is the best example, right? Watercare is doing fine. It's metered. It's a large company that, enjoys scale in Auckland. Elsewhere around the country, it's a shit show. And you get things like the Havelock North poisoning because you essentially have people whose incentives are set up all wrong, or bodies whose incentives are set up all wrong, which is that they... you tend to win or lose local government elections on recognisability and name recognition and... are you going to raise or lower rates or try and keep rates down? Now, that works directly against things like, unseen investment, and water infrastructure. And we're reaping the results of that now. So irrespective of, who, there are good mayors. There's good mayors all across New Zealand, but you can't guarantee it. And the best mayor will, often be just doing what the commissioners should be doing, say. So on a structural level, of course, local government should be abolished. I mean, there's probably a role for like local boards to, decide who the benches in each park are named after. That can be something you could have local meetings for that. But at scale, it's kind of mad idea that you would say, let's choose like among, butchers, real estate agents, PR people, God forbid, to plan out our water infrastructure for the next 30 or 40 years, My thinking has evolved somewhat though, because with Three Waters, if it does go ahead following the next election, then it would just need to be a Department of Parks.
Annabelle,
Yeah.
there's been a lot of discussion around the local election results from last weekend, which, if I recall correctly, Tania Tapsell won by a landslide in Rotorua. But more broadly, discussion about the extent to which that is a weather vane or carries a message for central government. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, it hasn't clearly gone right or left. You have places like the far north who have voted in a young Māori mayor like Moko Te Pania. You have Tory whānau, you have Tania, who all come from different political perspectives. For me, if you're to look at the Auckland example, I'm the opposite of Ben, and I'm more in keeping with Tania when I think that the overwhelming message from Auckland is actually about community voice. And there's been a lot of discussion in the last week about the reasons why there's such a low voter turnout in Auckland. And I think it's true that a lot of it is socio-economic. When you're worried about where your next meal is coming from and a piece of paper turns up with a whole lot of names on it that you don't recognise, it's not a priority to participate. And so in some ways I feel like the Auckland result is really a vote of no confidence in the super city. It's the biggest local government in Oceania, and I don't think that that's a badge of honour. And I think when communities in Otara and places like that don't get to rub up against their elected officials and don't feel a part of the process, that's when people start to not participate as well. And so I think that in that there is a message for the government, because it was Labour that instigated the super city legislation under Helen Clark. So I know that on the podcast I've waxed and waned about Three Waters and whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, but I think the message is that when you create these giant structures and you take away the decision making from the communities, the less participation you have, the more frustration, and then you end up with election results that are not always reflective of the communities that we live in.
What do you think, Jan, when you look at Internal Affairs isn't really involved in it, apart from the fact that it's responsible for recording the turnout numbers, I think, but it's not responsible, as far as I'm aware, for driving up turnout. But you must watch with interest when you see not just the turnout across the country that's going to probably scrape just above 40%, but also a level of competition for the places, which means that across the country everyone has a 50% chance of those who are standing there. Across the board, there are two candidates for every role. Something's not working.
Yeah, I tend to agree a little bit with what Annabelle just said, but I also am quite worried about the method of how we vote in the local government elections as well.
That certainly doesn't help.
Yeah, it doesn't help at all. And I worked in a community here, that low socioeconomic community. Most of those houses didn't even have letterboxes. So to get letters and to receive letters for then their voting, which is reliant on that, worries me that they just can't even see the relevance for them to even look further to try and vote, because they don't receive the letter in the first place. But then who posts letters these days? I had to even think where the mailbox was that I had to post my vote on that guy. I had to vote on the Friday before they were due because I was heading away. And I thought, where am I going to go and post this? Because I had no idea where the letterbox was, because I don't post letters anymore.
I had to instruct my husband to send mine.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, because he knows.
Yeah.
And certainly I've got 2 sons in their 20s. I haven't asked them, but I'd be pretty certain that they didn't vote. And part of that is around relevance, but part of that is also in the method of how we vote. And I think that we do need to look at that. And those are the things that the Prime Minister's already signalled needs to be investigated, because I feel that the low voter turnout is of a huge concern.
It's one of those things in the LGNZ, the Local Government New Zealand Association of Local Bodies, has called for a short, sharp review of the process. Well, there have been a bunch of reviews.
Yeah,
there have been these.
yeah.
The Justice Select Committee has done reviews after the last 3, I think, elections. They've called repeatedly, Tania, for the running of the elections to be centralised under the Electoral Commission. You've been involved in local body politics for a while. What's your view on that?
I think on all of it in general, and I was watching just, like a video on Instagram recently, and it explained it really well, is that if you're trying to bake a cake and you miss some ingredients and then you chuck it in the oven for well over 2 hours and it comes out burnt and you think, well, how the heck did that happen? It was actually your fault. So if you convert that into the voting turnout, which the video was trying to make the point of, is that if you don't bother to check if you're enrolled, if you don't bother to tick the box, and if you don't bother to send it off, and then you wonder why the councils end up being as horrendous as they have been, then really, whose fault was it? So we do have to be a bit more realistic with that, and that, women fought for the right to vote, chained themselves to doors and gates just to be able to have that vote that so many of us take for granted now. So I think that's really how I feel about it, is that we can throw so many millions of dollars into educating our community. Our teachers can put even more effort into educating the students about politics and the importance of voting. But if we're not actually taking that upon ourselves in our workplaces, in our homes, with our friends, to actually encourage people to get out, then, I think it really does come down to, you can moan as much as you want, but eventually you need to take some action.
You still need to have ovens available.
I do wonder, though, how many whānau in emergency housing on Fenton Street would have had, their voting papers delivered to them. And if they didn't, how many of them would have had the capacity to pull out their cell phone to sit on hold for half an hour to the Electoral Commission and those sorts of things. So I think for ordinary people like us, when you have some resource and capacity, we can do that. And a lot of people like us still don't vote. But for those really vulnerable whānau who are kind of most impacted by the decisions that get made at local government around food banks and all sorts of things, it's a different story, and we need to be more proactive in terms of getting those people engaged in the process.
And I totally agree with this, and I do like what Jan has also mentioned about the need to look at how we vote. I do agree and support with introducing some form of online voting as well. And I think the concerns in the past from governments who haven't implemented it because of security concerns, but we're very happy doing all of our online banking online and sending very confidential emails and all the above, that I think it is time that we allow that as an option, because you're right, and especially for younger populations and also Māori or Pacifica, who are the lowest voter turnout, how many times have they moved within the past 3 years? So, I think introducing more options would help with the overall voter turnout.
But the other thing is it just doesn't seem present for most people, right? Now, local government seems extremely oppressively present to me after the last 4 or 5 years. But, if you haven't been to sort of dozens of campaign meetings and had the same sort of speeches and Q&As done, over and over again, a lot of people don't really know that the elections are happening, right? So where there does tend to be, not high, but higher turnout, places like Wairoa, I think Rotorua had okay turnout, didn't it?
It was the highest in a while. It was like 46% or something, almost half.
Wow.
And it tends to be places with strong local news coverage, like strong community papers.
Live podcasts.
Live podcasts, that's right. Because up in Auckland, for instance, right, all of the media in Auckland is basically national media. The community newspapers sort of got gutted years ago, and they're basically just feeders from the Stuff newsroom in most cases. And trying to get any kind of news or debate up is, very, very difficult. I don't know if the Herald had one front page that was about the mayoral election. They heard Pippa Coombe, who lost to Annabelle's dad, saying that there wasn't any coverage of the councillor, and there were no debates held in the award between council candidates. So, I mean, in terms of this idea that the barrier is simply not being able to find a letterbox, which, very difficult for me. I'm 44, I'm the youth demographic for local government. And I didn't know where to go. I just, after about 3 times, I remembered to take it to Countdown. But, if you... It's not as if there were sort of, the missing million were kind of all noses pressed against the frosted glass of the council windows, demanding to be let in to vote, but being denied by, some sort of like Republican Florida voter suppression. It's that it just wasn't part of their lives, and you saw that. Like Efeso Collins was very clear that his campaign was about, the missing million, as it kind of gets called, and, getting those, and he spent a lot of time on the ground. They had the sort of vaunted ground game, and the numbers didn't move. It was still about 67% of the turnout of the average across Auckland in places like Otara. So the disconnect is much more fundamental than just getting brochures in people's letterboxes and getting clear instructions on how to vote.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Let's park local elections for a moment, and the by-election, which I don't want to go too much into that, but I'm interested, Tania. We on the podcast, Ben and Annabelle and I, when Simon Bridges announced that he was leaving his job as leader of the opposition to become a chilled-out entertainer in his new career, we all said, Tania Tapsell, there you go. Has stood in East Coast, did very well, is admired, Wahine Māori. Then you presumably at that point already had your heart set on the mayoralty. Would that be right? But did they try? Did someone come and sort of knock on your door at night and try and twist your arm and say, we need Tania Tapsell in Tauranga 2022?
I was certainly asked from those within the party and also members within the electorate to consider it, which is very humbling. But I think many people in this room who are from Tauranga will understand that Tauranga and Rotorua are very different. For me, I really wanted to be home in Rotorua, and I knew, and I hadn't declared it yet, but I knew that I did want to stand for me and finish off 9 years on council. I got to admit, I also was a little bit disappointed in the diversity of the candidates. So that's
there was
definitely
that incredible
something.
Photograph, wasn't there?
Oh, they're just all very, very similar. Dress codes perfectly on point. But no, so I was asked, but I think just in general with the National Party, but with all parties, what I was really pleased at is that so many people were upset that there wasn't enough diversity, that people looked at it and thought, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right with this picture. So I think that's a good sign of what people will expect of candidates and of political parties in the future.
Oh, Auntie Hoha, I thought you'd be interested to know that the other thing Tania said about selection backstage was that she felt that because she's not mana whenua in Tauranga moana, that was another consideration too, and that when Māori candidates stand, thought needs to be put into their connections to that rohe, which I thought was a really interesting cool whakaaro.
Could we pick up on that, just because this is one thing I'm interested in terms of Māori seats in Rotorua. So you had Māori seats in this election, but there was initially a bit of resistance, wasn't there, from both from Te Arawa in particular, because they already have a very close working relationship with the council and all sorts of arrangements and treaty-based accords. How do you think it sort of played out? I think I saw it reported that you had sort of changed your kind of mind about the Māori wards.
Yeah, so right from the start, when the Māori wards discussion came up, I was pleased that it would happen for the rest of the country. I was really concerned about what that would look like for Rotorua, because Rotorua would always vote in a really diverse council. We had 4 Māori councillors out of 10, of which all affiliate to the local Te Arawa iwi. And you have to be careful when you're already doing so well that the consequences of decisions don't have any unintended adverse impacts. And unfortunately, that did happen in Rotorua. So with the introduction of Māori wards, it now actually divided the community, not only by voter. If you're on the Māori roll, you could only vote for those Māori councillors. So now that's 3 votes instead of 10. And if you're on the general roll, you could only vote for general. So that was one aspect. But then also, if you're a candidate, all of a sudden you had to choose, well, if it was me, for example, I'm Māori, but does that mean I have to stand on the Māori roll, or do I forego all of the votes from my friends and family on the Māori roll to try stand for the general roll? And I am enlisted on the general roll because I believe we should all just be the same. But it was quite a disappointing result, I suppose, for Rotorua, that we did lose as many Māori councillors, and we did see 2 great Māori councillors who stood on the general ward not get in. So I think with every decision you have to be careful what you wish for. For Rotorua it was a backward step, I believe, but we're yet to see the results. So I'm still really open-minded to see the benefits of it. I don't want to scrap it before we give them a good chance, because they did get voted in on their own right. But I think ultimately where I would love to see our country and where I would love to see Rotorua is for people to just be able to stand, be the best, no matter who they are, no matter what age, no matter what ethnicity, and see the communities, like Rotorua has in the past, support them to be at the table.
I guess the advantage that you have in Rotorua, though, right, is that it's a high population Māori rohe, but it's different when you're in. It's different for mana whenua groups who are living in rohe where they're very much outnumbered. And so while I understand the unintended impact that it might have in a place like Rotorua, if you're living somewhere else like Christchurch or Tauranga. Something, Tauranga, you can see the benefits of it, right?
And just on that, before we wrap up that discussion, I think it's important to note that Māori councillors don't necessarily represent mana whenua. Anybody could stand to be a Māori councillor, whether they were Māori or not. And so there's still this real obligation for councils, even that have introduced Māori councillors, to still honour their Treaty of Waitangi agreements with mana whenua as well. So that's actually going to be the biggest challenge for all councils moving forward, is we now have Māori councillors, but you will still need some sort of relationship or agreement where you're helping to engage with the mana whenua iwi of that area too. And all councillors, including Māori councillors, all declare the same oath, that they will serve the entire district for the betterment of that district, not necessarily just Māori or general.
So we've got a general election next year. Jan Tinetti, can you remind us what the date will be for the election?
No. But good try.
Has it been discussed in Cabinet, or is that...
No, we haven't actually discussed it, only to say that the Prime Minister, and she said this quite publicly, that she can't see anything different to announcing that date quite early next year, but we haven't discussed it beyond that.
And there's a lot on the government's plate at the moment with a year or so to go. And there's been some discussion about whether it would be a bit like the Air New Zealand flight from New York to Auckland. Sometimes you've got to chuck a few bags off, you know, to get it there. 3 Waters, fair pay agreements, income insurance, media merger. Again, just in the room, just between us. Do you think one of those might have to get thrown overboard?
No.
No? All right, it's worth a try. What kind of election would you like it to be? What do you think the election, what will be the fault lines, the arguments, what will be the points of interest in the election next year?
I think for me, what I would like to see is something that I would like to see it not focus on is mis and disinformation. I feel that in the last few years, mis and disinformation has taken off in a way that we didn't anticipate as a country would ever happen to us. I've just come back on Thursday from a 2-week study trip, a ministerial study trip, where I took over a group of NGOs and our regulators and public servants and people from other political parties to Europe, and we were looking at content regulatory review. But part of the work that we were looking at just happened to morph into mis and disinformation. And Europe seemed to, and particularly where we ended up in Finland, seemed to deal with mis and disinformation better than what I've seen it being dealt with anywhere else in the world. And one of the reasons for that is because they've had a very strong focus over years on borders and what was across their border, particularly in Finland, because they've got the longest land border, of course, with their neighbour, Russia. And so they've been really aware of threats that have been coming from all different angles over that time. And so they've developed citizens or people in their country who are very critical thinkers. And I went to visit a school and I was blown away with these 14-year-olds and how they could bring critical thinking to everything that they were seeing on the internet, even to the point that these 14-year-olds said to me, you know, lots of people see TikTok and think that that's real, but nothing's real on TikTok. It's just good entertainment. And I thought, wow, you know, the level of reasoning that they were bringing was fantastic. And one of the reasons that I talk about Finland is because they started this journey because they knew that their elections were being influenced by external forces, and so they didn't want to have that happen. And that's what I want to ensure that we have going into the election in 2023, is that we don't have that mis and disinformation that tends to come from external areas influencing what we want as a country. I want us to decide about what's important for us as a country and ensure that we're not listening to what's coming from those external forces. And so that's some of the work now that I want to work on. It's not going to work for 2023, but I want to start to work on a curriculum where our young people are learning those critical thinking skills, that they're not being impacted by external forces telling them how to think.
It's one of those tricky things that happens with words like misinformation and disinformation. I think it's incumbent on people standing for office not to throw around terms like that when someone just says something they don't like.
Yeah, exactly.
And you saw that with Trump, you know, the fake news, but it's sort of the meaning gets absolutely sucked out of these things once I just don't like what Tania said. And I said, stop spreading misinformation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you can't have a go at someone because you're offended by what they've said, or you don't like what they've said because they've got a different political viewpoint. But you can absolutely work on that. What is the disinformation that's coming through there? And that's where it's learning to be critical in your thinking. And look, I had this amazing conversation with 14-year-olds who were fully aware of that. And they would say to me, oh, just because they might have a political point of view that I don't agree with doesn't make it mis or disinformation. And that's what we've got to be really, really clear about, is that freedom of expression is critically important in this country, and we must hold on to it to the nth degree. But we also must push back when that information is completely wrong and targeted to interfere in that freedom of speech.
Tania Tapsell, the election next year, what would you like it to be about? What would you like to see debated constructively, robustly in that campaign?
I think probably housing and crime would be the biggest ones that I would like to see debated constructively, because again, if I go back to what I said at the start, people are over the promises and then they're over the excuses, And a lot of the reasons that we're given why things aren't working is because you're blaming the previous government, who then blames the previous government. And, people are just a little bit over it. So what I would love to see is actually a real outcomes focus where we get really critical thinking on what we're spending and making sure that that money spent is what the local community wants. So not just someone sitting in Wellington making a decision for communities that they're not connected to or haven't had a conversation with, but also making sure that there's a bit of targets on that money so that if it's just not working, we don't keep investing millions, if not billions of dollars into something that's never going to be a real solution for those communities. I think we just need to get a bit smarter with our money because all of us are feeling that the wallet's a bit lighter these days.
Yeah. Annabelle, what is your crystal ball telling you in terms of the way that the election is likely to play? What are the fault lines going to be?
I think the fault lines will probably be the usual ones, like, urban, rural, business, workers. But my hope is that, and I know that it's unlikely to play out this way, but just that Te Tiriti isn't used as a tool to whip up resentment towards Māori and to spread disinformation about some of the amazing mahi that's happening around the country, including in Tania's rohe with, Te Aroa River Iwi Trust and the co-governance arrangements that are happening and producing really good results in terms of cleaning up our awa and the natural resources that we all care about and want our mokopuna to enjoy.
You're speaking about an hour after Winston Peters addressed the AGM in Christchurch. So do you think Winston's going to get back?
No.
Ben?
What about the election?
Well, anything you like. Let's first everyone, whether or not New Zealand First is going to get back. What do you think, Tania?
No.
Jan Tinetti?
No.
Okay.
No.
Ben?
No. Ruled out.
And what about the election more
generally? Shall we vote on
then?
it, make it official, pass a motion? Our mayor and our MP can sign it off.
Well, a room in Tauranga voting for Winston not to be in there.
Only the good burgers of Tauranga can make it happen. I think the election will be one that disappoints Annabelle in the sense that I think, it's going to be about, cost of living. Even if inflation, falls back, it's already, that's the one thing with inflation as distinct from some other indicators. It's already locked in, right? If prices rise by 7.5%, and then they only rise by 3.3% the next 6 months or year, it's still 10% higher, roughly. That's not maths, but, So people will be struggling. People who haven't been able to, increase their wages. There has been, we see it with sort of, the arguments over whether people should be paid to isolate with monkeypox. The expectation of government kind of cushioning financial distress for people that was sort of built up during COVID is really hitting up against the sort of realities of high inflation, of trying to get spending under control. And people are feeling that, right? And a lot of it is stuff that we can't control. It's the American economy, it's the price of gas. And whether that's sort of come back on course or not, the ripples of that will be, kind of, I think, the sort of backdrop for what happens next year in the election. I think, I've sort of worked politically in the kind of Te Tiriti space for about 14 years now or something. I'd say this is kind of, we're really heading into kind of 2004 sort of territory. I think there's certainly more public discontent about the Crown Māori relationship than I've seen, since that time. That will be something that Winston Peters will try and exploit.
And your mate.
To try and get into government, and the ACT Party will be fighting for that ground with them. I don't think National will really get into it beyond its sort of headline things like, the Māori Health Authority,
They got their wish, they demanded the debate, and here it is.
Yeah, here's the debate, yeah. So I think that will be the kind of B plot that runs through the election, while the major parties are really focused on cost of living, economic issues, and then where that plays out in terms of social deprivation, housing, obviously. But I think the B plot that will run through it will be Māori Crown relations stuff. Yeah.
There's Annabelle touched on this urban-rural thing, Tania, and travelling around a bit during the local elections, I found that Three Waters just in the cities not really a major factor. As soon as you moved out of the major centres, then it suddenly became very visible, including on signs on the side of the road and the debates and so on. And then we've had, of course, the emissions debate around in terms of agricultural emissions. Is that shaping up towards something? It's a constant, right? In terms of people have different voting patterns in rural areas to urban areas. Fine, but is it going to be wedgy? Is there a danger that it becomes what do you see when you've got a different perspective from those of us who live in?
Yeah, I think certainly from a provincial rural point of view, it's again just that real feeling that we're losing our voice. And as part of losing that decision making, you also lose the decision making on how much something's going to cost. So when you talk about Three Waters coming in, as a perfect example, Rotorua has always had an incredibly high standard of drinking water, which means that we know that if we were merged into Entity B, one of 4 entities across the country, we will be picking up the bill for helping other smaller councils to actually get their water infrastructure up to standards. And I think probably what the biggest issue for people is again that what's going to be the outcome from it. So you don't mind paying a little bit extra if you're going to get some sort of benefit of it. But certainly with the rural and provincial areas, when we see so much money designated from the government, bigger pull into infrastructure, we don't really feel or see much of that in the smaller communities. And because we are smaller communities, we rely on a smaller rate base to actually pay for that infrastructure too. So we have end up with these very big, long wish lists of our 10-year long-term plan, where you hope that your road might get sealed by the end of that 10 years. So it's a very different discussion between hoping your road's going to get sealed, your potholes are going to get fixed, compared to a big cycle lane or light rail.
Annabelle, the doors just opened suddenly.
As
if a message directly from God.
It's quite amazing. And now they're shutting again. Yeah.
You're missing out so much, those of you who are listening to this. It's been a lot of visual entertainment. Annabelle, it seems that a lot of the mayoral contests, the local body contests, with the exception of the landslide victory to Tania Tapsell and Rotorua, there was a kind of grouchiness that pervaded through lots of it, right? There was a feeling of a bit of a, what's that, down with this sort of thing kind of vibe. And I guess a lot of that is, of course, coming out of COVID, the cost of living crisis, just coming out of winter, there's a whole bunch of factors that feed into that mood. Yeah. Do you have again, crystal ball, political weather forecast? Do we all go and have a lovely summer, swim in the sea, wash out the cobwebs, come back wanting a bit of optimism? Because so far, and it's a long way out, I'm not hearing a lot of the, John Key used to do his cusp of something special trick, right? And it was that you need to give people something that is hopeful, the politics of aspiration or whatever. Do we come back feeling a bit more hopeful or wanting that hope next year, or do we just stay grouchy?
We would if the election was in February, but Jan's hinting that it's not going to be then.
What did she say, November?
November the 28th.
February, that's what Winston Peters announced. Is that what you're heading on? Snap election.
Yeah, he's announced that it's going to be a snap election.
February.
But no, because, it's going to be later. So, but There definitely is a grumpy wairua out there, but I don't think it's that unusual for where we are in the election cycle. It was kind of like that when Helen Clark was 6 years in. It's like that when any government is on the end of their second term, I feel like you start to get that kind of discontent rippling through. And I mean, I have some sympathy for Labour. I've said this before on the podcast. If you listen to Gone by Lunchtime, you've probably heard me say I sound boring, but I do stories all the time about communities with terrible water problems. My brother-in-law came to stay with me last week from Levin, and he's like, "Sis, can I drink the water out of the tap?" I'm like, "Yeah, bro, it's all good." But, there is an issue with water, and I respect that at least they've put some effort into trying to address this issue. It's not the answer. There's lots of, things that need to be worked through, but something has to be done, and I just hope that whatever happens after the election, that all of these rohe around the country are able to not rely on bottled water or boiled water, and that we can have the water infrastructure that we are a country that's rich enough to have. It's just crazy.
Somewhere along the line, it's become a kind of catch-all for grievances and dissent, the Three Waters thing, hasn't it? And so that story that you're telling, which is we can together achieve this beautiful glass of drinking water that we want, that's not what it's become, is it, Minister? That's the neighbour Jan.
Just remember that internal affairs doesn't cover local government and the Three Waters, that they have their own minister. Yes, so I'm not speaking as a minister.
No, for sure. Okay, what about more generally in terms of that point about the wairua that Annabelle touched on? Are we gonna go into an election next year with some optimistic light ahead of us?
Look, I think Annabelle's exactly right too when she talks about the discontent. I mean, they called it the winter of discontent. Helen Clark's government went through the winter of discontent at that time in exactly the same stage of the electoral cycle. But I also think that people are tired. People are just really tired with what we've had for the last 2.5 years. It's something that none of us anticipated. No one anticipated that the pandemic was going to hit like this and mean what it's meant for our country. But again, when you look at what's happened overseas, and when I was in other countries and they were looking, I was having ministerial meetings and the ministers were asking advice, countries like France, where the ministers were asking advice of us about how we'd handled this or how we had come through it, because they felt like they still had a long way to go. You sort of realise that we're a lot further ahead. Now, that doesn't mean much to the person on the street. The person on the street's living their life and can only see what's right in front of them, and rightly so. So we do need to have some hope. But what I get hope from is that I'm starting to feel a sense of optimism, and it's just a little bit, but I am starting to feel that sense of optimism when people are starting to see that life is returning back to some sense of normality again, and they're starting to feel that, this time last year, we couldn't have done this. And people now are starting to go out, and I was at an event last night that happens annually that couldn't happen last year, hasn't happened for the last 2 years, back doing it again, and the optimism was there. So I am starting to see an optimism around people getting control of their lives back, which they haven't felt that sense of control for quite some time.
You're a picture of optimism always, Ben, so it's hard for you to assess that one.
Yeah, in terms of the sort of mood for grumpiness, I think that's right. I think the government's pretty successfully put COVID behind it, or to rest as a sort of, prime ministerial issue. Right now it's just sort of business as usual operational issue for Ministry of Health. And people are getting back to normal, but the problem is that takes, the political problem there is that it takes you back to the kind of narrative that was sort of fully entrained before COVID hit, which was the lack of delivery. And I think it comes back to something Tania said right at the beginning, which is that if the local government sort of results, if you can read anything from them, I think it's very hard because of, the individual races are very different. The turnout's very low. The people who turn out don't really give you a read on what will happen in a national election. But I think if they show anything, it's that middle-class voters are less probably susceptible to utopianism. In Auckland, for instance, Wayne Brown ran on fixing Auckland, right? Get these projects done, versus Feso Collins was like $500 million a year for free public transport. Leo Malloy wanted a waterfront stadium and the Commonwealth Games and all this sort of thing. I don't think there's that appetite for the big promises, that because people have sort of, the electorate doesn't expect that they'll be delivered. In terms of if you promise 100,000 houses, they're not going to be built. If you promise light rail to the airport by 2020, I think the first stage to Mount Roskill was meant to be finished, and just hasn't happened, right? Shovels will go on the ground in 2 or 3 years' time. So, Get Wellington Moving is now currently on its third business case, which the business case is going to cost $120 million. That's a report. I could do it for like 80 million.
Would you like a role in the implementation unit, Ben?
5 million a page, not even double spaced. I think that people, that it will be much harder for the major parties to bring the kind of big vision. We can deliver you this, we can build this, we can bring you this. I think it'll be, it will be in that kind of mode about discontent, careful management, safe pair of hands, that kind of thing.
Well, on that upbeat note, we're just about out of time. I've asked everyone, just to wind things up, casting ahead to election year next year, to pluck out one wild, unlikely prediction for election year. Do you want to go first, Ben, down there, and we'll come back this way? Your wild prediction for 2023 election year.
It's less a prediction and more like a manifesting it. But some senior New Zealand First figure goes to prison. led out across the parliamentary forecourt in leg irons, maybe with like a ball and chain behind them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Good.
Let's just all think about it and
Good and theatrical. Thank you very much. Annabelle Lee Mather, what's your
mine's not for 2023, but...
that was the brief. The brief was for 2023.
I didn't read the brief.
It's also not a prediction. It's just
it's a matapai.
All right.
That Tania will be the first Wahine Māori Prime Minister.
Ooh.
But can I just say, T's and C's, my mum actually said that Simon Bridges was going to be the first Māori Prime Minister, and he's now a podcast host. So this may be the kiss of death for you, and if it is, I apologise.
When will you, Tania, stand for Parliament next, do you think?
Not for some time. No, we need to do a really good job in Rotorua. And because I keep getting asked the question, but I keep saying, why would I take off to Wellington when my hometown is in such a bad state? And I don't know about the people in this room or the people listening, but when you hear Rotorua, do you have any great thoughts? And the answer is unfortunately no. Our reputation has been severely damaged by emergency housing, by the increase in crime rates. And if we don't fix that, then our families in Rotorua are going to feel that for a few generations. So I'm very committed to making some positive change as mayor.
So 2026 is the... Jan Tinetti, your prediction, please.
I predict that on the back of a successful Dancing with the Stars competition,
Nice.
David Seymour's chief platform for campaigning will be a Treasure Island appearance and going for winning Treasure Island in 2023.
At least it's not that F boy one.
Although you never know. So.
Tania, your prediction, please.
Because they said they never will, my wild prediction would be that the Māori Party actually does work with the National Party and they form the next government.
Very good prediction. My prediction is that it's going to be a dead heat in the election next year.
Yeah.
If anyone else has got any predictions, please shout them out after we complete the podcast, because we don't have the technology to deal with it. We've got to wrap this up. Thank you very much for joining us on this live podcast experiment. Thanks to Ben, to Annabelle, to Te Aihe, our producer over here, who many people only listen to our podcast so they can hear his voice. So you've got to at least say kia ora. Have you got a mic? Say kia ora. Just shout it out, just so we can have the golden velvet voice of Te Aihe Butler.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
Round of applause for that. Thank you to Jan Tinetti, to Tania Tapsell. Thank you to the Escape Festival Tauranga, to Gab and to Nikki and the whole team. Fantastic event. And thank you to the audience. It's been fun. Thank you. Got it.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.